Before cake pops and fondant, birthdays were about ice cream floats, colorful Jell-O, and enough sprinkles to fill your socks. Let's blow out the candles on these 1950s birthday treats. Snowball cake was birthday extravagance, done the 1950s way. For the kids who were bored out of their minds of the traditional birthday cake, this was what they asked Mom to make. Let me tell you about them. Snowball cake was a domed cake, shaped like a half sphere and baked in a bowl instead of a regular pan. The cake inside was usually chocolate or devil's food, rich, moist, and just the right kind of dense to hold its shape. But this was all about what went on top. First came a generous slather of marshmallow frosting, smooth, sticky, and sweet as a Saturday matinee. Then came the coconut, lots of it, pressed on all over the outside like snow on a hillside. It was often tinted pink with a little food coloring, so the whole thing looked like a candy-coated snow globe. Some versions had surprises inside too, like a creamy marshmallow filling or a layer of cherry or strawberry jam to cut through the richness. And when you sliced into it, that contrast between the dark cake and the fluffy white or pink outside was just about as pretty as a picture. Biting into one was like biting into a Hostess Snowball's fancier cousin. You had the soft chocolatey cake, the gooey sweet frosting, and that coconut adding a little chew and texture. Kids either loved coconut or spit it out into their napkin. But for those of us who were fans, this was top-tier stuff, and they had to have it on their special day. It was a bit more work to make than your run-of-the-mill birthday cake, which is probably why it doesn't show up at birthday parties as much. But when it did, you knew it was going to be a birthday to remember. The best birthday shindigs in the 50s had at least a tray of popcorn balls, all wrapped in wax paper or cellophane, looking like little edible planets. Moms would whip them up the night before the party, stacking them high in a big bowl on the kitchen counter. Popcorn balls weren't just some fly-by-night snack. They were a holdover from Depression era and wartime America. When folks had to make do with what was on hand, popcorn was cheap, cheerful, and could stretch a long way. By the time the 1950s rolled around, they became a birthday staple, mainly because they were festive, easy to make in batches, and kids loved gnawing on something sticky and sweet. The real magic came from the syrup. You'd start with a mess of plain popped corn. No butter, no salt, just clean, fluffy kernels. Then you'd make a sticky sweet mixture on the stove. Sugar, corn syrup, a pat of butter, a splash of vanilla, and even a little vinegar or molasses if you were getting fancy. Some folks used marshmallows, but that was more of a late decade thing. You'd heat that goo up to the soft ball stage, then pour it over the popcorn and stir like the dickens. Shaping them was a job for greased hands, so Dad helped during this part. Lube up with a little butter or Crisco and roll those suckers into baseball-sized clumps before the syrup cooled. If you waited too long, forget it. They'd set like concrete. Sometimes moms would dye the syrup pink or green for a bit of flair, and if she really wanted to knock your socks off, she would toss in some chopped peanuts or colored sprinkles. They were a chewy, crunchy delight, light as air on the outside, but with that sticky, sugary crust that'd give your jaws a workout. You'd spend a solid 5 minutes pulling bits out of your teeth, but it was worth every tug. Sweet, a little buttery, with a mild roasted corn flavor. Kind of like kettle corn, but stickier and more substantial. They weren't something you could wolf down quick. Popcorn balls made the party slow down a little, and with so much merriment going around, not one kid complained. Not when they have this next party food to keep them busy. Here's a bouncy little number that always brought a smile to a kid's mug. Jell-O started calling these jigglers in 1990, but the treat itself was already a hit when Eisenhower was in office. We just called it finger Jell-O or gelatin squares, and every birthday party worth its salt had a tray of the wobbly wonders set out like a rainbow checkerboard, Jell-O had already been around for decades. Heck, it first showed up in the late 1800s. But by the mid-20th century, it was the dessert of convenience. Housewives loved it. Cheap, colorful, easy to make, and it looked downright space-age when molded right. And you better believe kids flipped their lids over it. The jigglers were made a little stiffer than your standard bowl of Jell-O dessert, double the gelatin, less water. So they held their shape and you could pick them up and pop them in your yap without a spoon. The recipe was easy as pie. Take a few boxes of flavored gelatin powder, cherry, lime, orange, grape, whatever your flavor, mixed with boiling water. You'd stir it till the sugar dissolved, pour it into a shallow dish or a greased mold, and toss it in the icebox for a few hours. Once it was good and firm, out came the cookie cutters, and you'd cut those jiggly suckers out like sugar cookies. Or, if you didn't care enough to make them pretty, just cut them into squares with a butter knife and call it a day. They tasted like sweet, fruity magic, not too rich, not too filling. Just a cool, smooth little bite that danced around on your tongue and wiggled like it had a mind of its own. The best ones had that chilled snap when you bit into them. Kids would spend half the party holding them up to the light, watching them shimmer before taking a bite. And if your mom was the real Martha Stewart type, before there was a Martha Stewart, she'd layer a couple colors to make them look like stripes or checkerboards. Now, if you made too much Jell-O, you can use it for this next 1950s party favorite. A tall glass layered with colors and textures just screams birthday, don't you think? The word parfait comes from the French, meaning perfect. And to a kid in 1955, digging their spoon down through layers of whipped cream, pudding, and fruit, it was just about perfect. We didn't do the complicated custardy French kind with all the whipped eggs and whatnot. Nah, ours were the American-style ones, fast, fun, and sweet as a summer fair. Birthday parfaits usually started with Jell-O or pudding, chocolate or vanilla if you were a purist, but butterscotch if you had a real sharp May. That'd go in first, just a good scoop or two at the bottom of a clear glass. Had to be clear so you could see all the layers, that was half the fun. Then came a layer of whipped cream, the real kind if you could afford it. But the kind from a tub or a can ain't too shabby either. After that, crack open a canned fruit cocktail with syrupy grapes, little bits of peach, and those weird chewy cherries that only ever showed up in those tins. Sometimes moms would sneak in crumbled cookies or pound cake to make it feel like something from a soda fountain. Then you'd just keep on layering. More pudding, more whipped cream, a handful of sprinkles or crushed nuts on top if it was a hootenanny of a birthday. Moms loved them because they were quick to make and looked like you went to a whole lot of trouble. And since they were served in individual glasses, every kid felt like they got one made just for them. Cool, creamy, richness in every cup. But with those fruity bits for a little zing, the whipped cream kept it light. So even after a hot dog, potato chips, and a slice of birthday cake, you could still find room for a parfait. They might not have had the razzle-dazzle of a frosted cake, but if you saw those lined up in the icebox before a party, you smiled just the same. Spam canapés were for the folks who were trying to put on a touch of elegance without breaking the bank. In the 1950s, Spam wasn't just a wartime holdover. It was practically a food group all on its own. And when a birthday rolled around, out came the canapé tray with those little Spam bites lined up like soldiers on parade. Now, don't get it twisted. These weren't your everyday ham sandwiches. Canapés were meant to look as fancy as finger food you'd see at a cocktail party in a Doris Day movie. They were bite-sized and served on trays, with toothpicks or even tiny forks if you had the cutlery for it. Spam was perfect for this. Cheap, salty, shelf-stable, and easy to slice into neat little squares or rounds. There were a bunch of ways to make Spam canapés, But the basic starts out like this: a small base, often a Ritz cracker, slice of toasted white bread cut into shapes, or even those little cocktail rye slices. Then you'd top that with a slice of pan-fried or broiled Spam, browned just enough to get a crust on it. After that, well, that's where moms got creative. A dollop of mustard mayo mix, a sliver of pickle or olive, maybe even a ring of canned pineapple if you were doing the whole Hawaiian flair thing. That was all the rage back then. Spam canapes were salty, savory, and a little smoky from the fry pan, with that canned meat tang that stuck to your tongue, mixed with the buttery crunch of a cracker or the sweet zip of relish. You had yourself a bite that punched way above its weight. For a kid, meat on a cracker was a curiosity, but for grown-ups hanging by the punch bowl, it was a crowd pleaser. And let's not forget, they were practical too. You could whip up a couple dozen from a single can, and they sat out well without spoiling. Perfect for birthdays when you had a whole house full of guests yakking all day. Frosted animal cookies were the cat's pajamas at any kid's birthday party in the 1950s. Little horses, elephants, and giraffes would be stacked up in a candy dish next to the punch bowl, looking all bright and cheery like a circus just rolled into town. Those frosted fellas weren't quite the same as the ones folks gobble up today. Back then, most animal cookies came from Nabisco Barnum's Animals line, the kind in the box with the circus wagon print and the little string handle. You remember those? But for the frosted variety, those were homemade more often than not. Moms would bake up a batch of plain sugar cookies, cut out with animal-shaped cutters, lions, bears, the whole menagerie, and then go to town decorating them like it was the state fair cookie contest. The frosting was a simple powdered sugar glaze, just confectioner's sugar, milk or lemon juice, maybe a dab of butter or vanilla. You'd tint it with pastel food coloring, pink, blue, yellow, whatever matched your party napkins. Once those cookies cooled off, each one got a careful slathering of icing and a little shower of rainbow sprinkles or those silver dragées, though your dentist wouldn't be too thrilled about those. They'd set with a slight sheen, firm on top but soft enough to give under a bite. When they were made right, they were sweet but not cloying, with a little crunch around the edges and that soft sugar hit from the frosting. They were buttery, vanilla-kissed, and melt in your mouth good. Kids loved them because they were colorful and cute. When the party's over, moms would pack them into little bags as party favors, tied up with curling ribbon. Looking at that glass bowl all fizzy and frothy with neon-colored sherbet melting into a bubbly mess was like watching a science experiment. The best part is that you get a tasty dessert by the time you're done watching. See, in those days, we didn't have soda bars or fancy smoothies at home. A sherbet punch stepped in to fill that role, and dare I say, do it better. The base was usually ginger ale or lemon lime soda. 7-Up, Bubble Up, and Canada Dry were the most common ones. Then came the sherbet. Orange was a favorite, but rainbow and lime had their moments too. A big brick of it would get plopped right into the soda, and whoosh, instant foam, fizz, and fun. Some folks added canned pineapple juice or even Hawaiian punch to give it a fruitier kick. If you wanted to take it up a notch, you'd float some orange or lemon slices on top, maybe even a cherry or two for color. Together, it looked like a river of sweet sin. And as you would expect, it was a sugar rush in a cup. Cold, creamy, and fizzy all at once. You'd get the sweetness of the soda, the creamy chill of the sherbet, and that tangy pop from the fruit juice. It was like a dessert and a drink had a baby. You didn't sip it, you gulped it, usually while spilling half of it down your front in excitement. There was always that one kid who tried to scoop out just the sherbet blobs floating on top with the ladle. Sometimes that kid was me, but no one minded too much, long as there was still enough fizz for a refill. This right here is a treat so old-timey you'd think you were nibbling on something out of the general store in a black and white Western. But in the 1950s, rock candy still showed up at birthday parties. Was it a good idea? Probably not. But hey, it's good to let kids be kids every once in a while. Rock candy was something you could buy from the corner store, where they sold it on little wooden sticks or strings in big jars next to the jawbreakers and licorice ropes. But the best ones came from your own kitchen, where your ma would boil up sugar water on the stove and let you watch it cool in a mason jar with a string hanging down into the syrup. Then, over a few days, if you could stand to wait that long, sparkly crystals would start to grow on the string like magic. It was an arts and crafts project and a dessert in one. What was in it? Nothing but sugar, water, and a little food coloring if you wanted to make it worth looking at. Sometimes a splash of peppermint or lemon extract gave it a flavor, but more often than not, it just tasted like sweet, crunchy heaven. Pure sugar, crystallized into jagged little gems that'd glint in the light and snap between your teeth. At birthday parties, kids would compare whose was bigger or more sparkly, and they'd gnaw on that stick till your teeth ached, or the whole thing dissolved into a sticky mess. If you're wondering what it tasted like, it was just uncut, full-blown sweetness. It was slow melting, so you could suck on it for ages like a lollipop, or crunch it if you didn't like waiting. Did your childhood party have any of these treats? If so, comment down below. I'd love to hear your sweetest memories. Now on to yet another 1950s birthday favorite. Snow cones were a birthday treat that really hit the spot, especially if you were lucky enough to have a party in the summertime. Nothing quite like it. A paper cone filled to the brim with crunchy shaved ice and soaked in neon-colored syrup until it dripped down your elbows. Sticky arms were part of the deal. Back in the 50s, snow cones were a mainstay at the local fair. But if your folks really went all out, your dad would bring a hand-cranked ice shaver to the backyard party. He'd set that big metal contraption on a card table next to a lineup of squeeze bottles full of syrup. Red for cherry, blue for raspberry, green for lime, and so on. The concept was as simple as it gets. Crush a load of ice. Jam it into those flimsy waxed paper cones. Then drizzle on the syrup until the whole thing looked like a rainbow exploded. Sometimes it was a race to eat it before it melted into colored water, especially under that hot afternoon sun. That first bite was always a shock, cold enough to freeze your front teeth, sweet enough to give you a grin from ear to ear. The top was all syrupy goodness, while the bottom was usually more ice than flavor, unless you were smart and asked for a double pour. It was crunchy, melty, and way more exciting than a regular popsicle. You'd try every color you could get your mitts on, but cherry and blue raspberry were always the big winners. Cleanup wasn't too bad unless someone dropped their cone and the ants came marching. The gumdrop tree was the pièce de résistance of a 1950s party table. It was part snack and part decor. Kids would crowd around it like it was the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree, just made of candy instead of lights. Now, the gumdrop tree started life as a styrofoam cone, or if your mom was the crafty type, she'd fashion one out of floral foam or even a carved-up potato in a pinch. She'd wrap it in foil, and then she'd start sticking toothpicks in it, each one holding a gumdrop like a little sugary ornament. You'd get all the colors, red, orange, yellow, green, and purple, the kind of gumdrops that were all sugar-crusted and chewy, not those smooth jelly beans or fancy licorice dots. Most of those gumdrops came from Brax or the corner store bins. And boy, did they taste like childhood. Each color had its own thing going. Cherry, lemon, lime, orange, and that mysterious purple. Was it grape? Floral? Who knows? They were sweet, but they had that little bit of spice, especially in the darker ones that gave them a grown-up twist. You didn't always love every flavor, but you kept reaching for them anyway. The gumdrop tree was there for admiring first. Kids had to wait until the candles were blown out and the birthday song sung before they could start plucking them off like vultures. And it was chaos once that first kid made a move. Moms would scold, but I think they were just glad the kids were entertained without starting a wrestling match in the yard. It was cheap, easy to make, and it brought a wow factor to the table. Didn't take more than $1 worth of gumdrops and a free afternoon, but it looked like $1 million to us kids. What more could you ask for from birthday fare? These little numbers were no joke. Wiener Winks were a party favorite. Every good backyard birthday bash had a tray of these sitting out, still warm and smelling like home cooking. So, how do you make a Wiener Wink? You take a slice of white sandwich bread, flatten it out a bit with a rolling pin or your hand. Then lay a slice of American cheese across it and drop a hot dog right in the middle. Then, here's the wink. You roll it up like a little blanket, toothpick it shut so it don't flop open in the oven, and bake the whole thing until the cheese is gooey and the bread's just starting to get that nice golden toast. Some folks would brush it with a little melted butter or even beat an egg over the top to give it a glossy finish. The result was a kind of toasty cheese dog cigar, if you will, crunchy on the outside, melty in the middle, with that salty hot dog flavor that every kid in the world loved. Sometimes moms would cut them into thirds or halves to make them more bite-size for party trays. All that was left for you to do was to squirt a bit of mustard or ketchup inside for extra zip. They were easy to make, easy to eat, and best of all, they had a catchy name. It didn't matter if you were turning 5 or 50. The big bowl of salty, crispy chips next to a dish of creamy onion dip was always the first thing folks hovered around. You set that out on the table, and you might as well have rung a dinner bell. Lay's had become a household name in the middle of the 20th century. The chips came in those crinkly wax paper bags, remember? Inside were thin, golden, salty chips with a nice, oily sheen that left your fingers slick for the next 5 minutes. Not much has changed since then. They were as crunchy, light as air, and downright addictive as they are today. But it was the dip that was a 1950s party hallmark. Back then, it was all about that envelope of Lipton's onion soup mix stirred into a tub of sour cream. That's it. 2 ingredients. Once it hit the table, the chips disappeared faster than birthday balloons in a windstorm. The dip had this rich, tangy base from the sour cream, and that packet mix brought in all the savory onion flavor. Bits of dried onion, garlic, and some mystery seasonings that hit you right in the umami. It was creamy, salty, with just enough zip to keep you dipping long after you were full. Every now and then, you'd get a chip that snapped off and sank into the dip, but we all just fished it out with another one and ate it just the same. Double dipping? That rule hadn't even been invented yet. When it was someone's birthday, moms didn't just slap a piece of ham between 2 slices of bread and call it a day. No, sir. At a proper birthday party, especially one where the ladies were trying to put on a little class, you got these dainty, colorful, open-faced numbers laid out on a tray like hors d'oeuvres fit for a tea party. They were served on little squares or circles of white bread with the crusts cut off. Crusts made it look too much like lunch. You'd see them sliced into triangles or cut with cookie cutters, and then topped with all sorts of things. Egg salad with a little paprika sprinkled on top, thin slices of cucumber with a dollop of cream cheese, pimento cheese spread, or even chopped deviled ham. Sometimes you'd get a slice of hard-boiled egg on top with a sprig of parsley. These weren't built to fill you up. They were more about keeping your taste buds busy in between mains and cakes. They had a soft, creamy texture thanks to the spreads, and most of them were pretty mild in flavor. That's just how folks liked it back then. The pimento cheese had a little tang to it, maybe some sharp cheddar in there, but it was mellowed out with mayo. The egg salad was fluffy and smooth, and the ham salad had that salty-sweet combo that stuck with you. And you better believe those sandwiches were laid out in neat little rows on a tray, with a doily underneath if your mom was the lace tablecloth type. They were usually made a couple hours ahead and covered with damp towels so they wouldn't dry out. A trick passed down from aunt to aunt like a family secret. You didn't even need a special occasion to enjoy peanut butter pinwheels, but a birthday was a great excuse to have them. These little spirals were sweet, sticky, and so rich you'd need a tall glass of milk just to make it through a second helping. But that did little to stop us from going for seconds. Now, there were a couple ways folks made peanut butter pinwheels, but the old school candy version started with a dough made from powdered sugar and mashed potatoes. Yep, you heard that right, potatoes. See, leftover mashed potatoes mixed with heaps of powdered sugar turned into this soft, pliable candy dough. The starch from the potato acted like glue, holding everything together while staying sweet and smooth. It didn't taste like spuds one bit once it was all mixed. Once that dough was made, it'd get rolled out flat like pie crust, usually on wax paper dusted with more sugar to keep it from sticking. Then came the peanut butter from a creamy jar of Jif or Skippy, spread smooth across the whole surface, right to the edges. After that, you'd roll it up like a jelly roll, nice and tight, then chill the whole thing in the icebox for a bit to firm it up. Once set, you sliced it into thick little pinwheels, each with that beautiful swirl of tan and white. What did it taste like? Sweet, real sweet. The dough was like fudge, soft and sugary with a melt-in-your-mouth texture, and the peanut butter gave it a salty, nutty contrast that kept it from being too cloying. One bite and your teeth stuck together, but it was worth every sugary second. It was candy disguised as a snack, and of course, kids couldn't get enough. And since they didn't need any baking, they were pretty handy in the summer when the kitchen already felt like the inside of a toaster. If you were in need of another party food that didn't need baking, you turned to butterscotch haystacks. These little golden clusters were pure bliss. They didn't look like much, just rough, knobby piles sitting on wax paper. But boy, oh boy, one bite, and you were in for a sweet, crunchy, salty treat that didn't need a lick of baking. The idea was to melt down a bag of butterscotch chips in a saucepan or double boiler, with a spoonful of peanut butter stirred in to give it a little extra richness. Once it was all smooth and glossy, you'd pour it over crispy chow mein noodles, the kind that came in a can, crunchy, right out of the tin. You could add salted peanuts or mini marshmallows for fun, but the real deal classic haystack was just butterscotch and noodles. Then came the fun part. You'd drop spoonfuls of that sticky mix onto wax paper and let them cool until they set up firm. Once they were ready, they were heavenly. You got that smooth, sweet butterscotch, caramelly, buttery, with a touch of brown sugar warmth, clinging to all those crunchy noodles. The noodles brought this light, salty crunch that balanced the sweetness just right. Every bite was a mix of chewy and crisp, and they melted on your tongue after a few chews. They held up well on party trays. No frosting to smear or cake to crumble, just sturdy little mounds of sugary goodness ready to pop in your mouth. All right, party's over. But before you head out, I'd love to hear which of these classic 1950s birthday foods was your favorite. Leave a comment below to let me know. And if you had fun watching, don't forget to subscribe to Memory Manor for more. Thanks for dropping by.